I've mentioned a couple times throughout the course so far that there are these hidden forces that shape our habits and behavior. And I want to talk about the first of those hidden forces now. In this module, we'll be discussing the power of environment and how it shapes our habits and actions, our choices and behaviors throughout each day, and what we can do to optimize and improve that. To open this up, I'd like to tell you a little bit of a story about some research that was done by biologist Jared Diamond. Now, Diamond is not only a biologist, but also a geologist, and so he studies the shape of the world and how it impacts the living organisms within those environments. And one interesting piece of research that he did looked at the shape of different continents, which obviously differs, and the rates of agriculture across those continents. So, for example, the primary axis of Europe and Asia is east-west, right? It's a very long landmass all the way from France to China that is primarily east and west in orientation. The primary axis of Africa, or North and South America, for example, is north-south. So Africa is primarily up and down, so is South America and North America, all connected in one landmass. And what Diamond found was quite interesting, that agriculture tended to spread about 2 to 3 times faster across Europe and Asia as it did up and down the Americas throughout the years. And there are a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons for this is different climate. So for example, as you go north and south, the climate is much different in, say, Florida versus Canada. Whereas the climate is very similar, rainfall, sunlight, and so on, in France, all the way across Asia to China. And so farmers could take one crop and spread it all the way across the Eurasian landmass, but they would need a new crop every time they got to a different climate or environment in Africa or Asia. And the net result of this is that over the course of centuries, agriculture spread 2 to 3 times faster. Now, once you understand this, it becomes somewhat interesting to think about. Where else does the environment shape our habits and behavior? Does it shape our success and failure? There's no evidence that we have that farmers in Europe and Asia were more motivated, for example, than farmers in Africa or the Americas. There's no evidence that we have that they were more talented or genetically gifted. It's just a factor of the environment that they were operating in, and that made success more possible or more likely or more expedient or more rapid. And so it's the same way with our habits and behaviors on a small scale as it is with the spread of agriculture on a large scale. The environment that we live in, the physical space we are surrounded by, the options that are presented to us shape the actions that we take and the success that we do or don't have. And the purpose of these lessons that are to come is to help you design an environment of inevitability, a place where making progress, building habits that stick, making behavior change possible is not just a hopeful outcome, but an inevitable outcome. If we can organize our environment in such a way to shape our behaviors and make success more likely, then it becomes much easier for us to stick with habits and routines. And this is one of the core lessons of the power of environment on our habits, which is that so often we like to ascribe our success to whether or not we have willpower. If we happen to get a new job, it's because we worked hard and we're dedicated. And if we don't get a job, it's because the economy sucks and there's no jobs on the market. So we're quick to blame the environment when things go negatively, but we forget about the power of the environment when things go positively. And so often what looks like good luck is really just a good environment that is promoting the behaviors and actions that you want to take versus the ones that you don't want to take. So as we start these lessons, keep that in mind, and we'll talk about ways to optimize and improve the environment that you operate within so that your habits can stick rather than fail. In 1971, there were 2 congressmen who left the United States and traveled to Vietnam to see the troops who were fighting in the Vietnam War. While they were over there, they discovered something very troubling, which was that about 15% of the soldiers that they met were addicted to heroin. Later research went on to confirm that about 20% of soldiers were actually addicted to heroin, and over 40% had tried it at some point during their service in Vietnam. Now, when the congressmen returned home to the United States, they realized that there was a real problem going on and that they needed to solve it. And so they hired a team of researchers to look in and investigate further and then come up with a plan of action for what to do. And the researcher who's leading this effort was a woman named Lee Robbins, who her discoveries in this case went on to become quite famous because they completely upended the current knowledge of how addiction works and what drives it. What Robbins and her team found was that when the soldiers returned home from Vietnam, the re-addiction rate was only 5%. And this was the complete opposite of what the typical re-addiction rate was, more than 95% in most cases. So if you had a standard person who was living in a neighborhood in the United States, they were addicted to heroin and then they went into rehab, the odds that they would come back and get re-addicted when they returned home were over 90%. Meanwhile, these soldiers from Vietnam who were in an incredibly stressful situation, they came over after being heavy users of heroin and only 5% re-addicted. So what was going on here? Well, what Robbins ended up discovering was that the environment had a critical role on the behavior of the soldiers. When they were in Vietnam, they were surrounded in an environment where heroin was readily accessible. They were surrounded by other heroin users, so they were triggered and stimulated to use in a community setting. And they were also in an incredibly stressful war zone, which prompted and sparked many of the heroin habits as a way to reduce stress. So what they discovered was that the way to radically change your behavior is to radically change your environment. This is one of the main punchlines and discoveries of her research, is that whether or not we choose to perform a particular behavior is largely dependent on the environment that that behavior is in. Human behavior is incredibly contextual and heavily dependent on the situation in which it occurs. So while we often ascribe methods like willpower or some type of therapy as being useful for addiction, it often is the case that the environment itself is the trigger for the actual habit. Now, once we understand this, it opens up a very wide range of interesting things to consider when it comes to building new habits and behaviors. How does the environment that you live and work in right now shape and shift your performance on a daily basis? What type of actions are you surrounded by? Who are you surrounded by, and how do their actions and habits spark your choices on a daily basis? If we want to radically change our behavior, we need to radically change our environment. In the lessons to follow, I'm going to talk about a few practical ways to do exactly that. So stay tuned. All right, let's talk a little bit about how to optimize your environment. So to do this, I'd like to share a concept known as choice architecture. And one of the best examples of choice architecture comes from a team of researchers at Harvard that were looking at Massachusetts General Hospital and the eating habits of different patients and visitors in the hospital cafeteria. So this is how it started. The group went into the cafeteria, analyzed what people were typically eating and drinking, and then thought about how can we change this environment in a way that will shift people's habits in a good way without even talking to them, without trying to motivate them, without asking them to have increased willpower, to set a goal. Can we change people's behavior automatically without even discussing it with them? So this is what they did. You can imagine walking into the hospital cafeteria, and all around the side are these different buffet lines with food and different places to get something to eat. Then, in the center of the room, there are 2 cash registers, and next to the cash registers, there are these refrigerators. And the refrigerators are filled with a variety of different drink options, food and water and soda. And on the side of the room, there's a small refrigerator that has water in it, but that's the only place where water is available. So at this point, the researchers decide we're going to put water throughout the entire cafeteria. So they kept the soda available, but they just added water to every refrigerator and then also some additional areas throughout the cafeteria. And what they found was quite interesting. Over the next 6 months, sales of water increased substantially, 26%, and sales of soda decreased by 11%. Now, if you were to go up to any individual sitting in the cafeteria and ask them, why did you order this soda, or why did you get this water? Everybody would be able to come up with a reason. They'd say, well, this is what I wanted to drink, or I really like Coke, or whatever their reason may be. But in fact, many of them bought it not because they had a good reason or because they actively sought it out, but simply because it was presented to them as an option. And this is the punchline of many of our habits and behaviors throughout daily life. We make choices based on the options that are presented to us and not based on what we actually want to achieve or what we consciously seek out. And this idea is known as choice architecture, that if we can change the architecture, the way that options are presented to us each day, that we'll actually make different choices. And there are a variety of researchers and scientists who have taken advantage of this, marketers especially, in a business sense. So for example, if you walk into a grocery store, items on the end of the aisles, on the end caps, those get purchased more than things that are in the middle of the aisle. So very prominent things are featured on the end of the aisles. Items that are on shelves at eye level get purchased more than things that are down by your feet. So often, more profit maximizing products will be put at eye level. Now, you and I can take advantage of these discoveries in a different way. We can optimize our home environment or our workspaces, any place that's under our control, to present ourselves with better options in spaces that are more visible, like by putting healthier foods on shelves at eye level in our refrigerators or in our pantries. and by making more unhealthy options less visible, so tucking away unhealthy foods in the corner or in the bottom, or down by our feet in the pantry or in the fridge. But there are a variety of other examples that we can use too, right? I've been talking about food mostly, but choice architecture extends to many of our habits throughout life. If you walk into pretty much any living room, all the couches and chairs face the television. So what is that room designed to get people to do? It's designed to get people to watch TV. And if we wonder why we're watching shows so mindlessly or watching for hours each night, it's often because that's what the environment promotes. So there are a variety of choices you can make here. You could do something simple like take the remote and take it off the table and tuck it inside of a drawer so that you don't see it as much. You could take the TV and put it inside a cabinet and close the doors so that you're not stimulated to watch it. You could also do something more extreme, like unplug the television, put it in a closet, and then when you really want to watch something, like a big game on the weekend or your favorite show, that one weeknight, take it back out and plug it in. But the point here is the same. How can you optimize the environment to make the good behaviors easier and the bad behaviors harder? A couple ways that you can do this is through a strategy that B.J. Fogg, professor at Stanford University, calls designing for laziness. And he describes it as follows. So Fogg likes popcorn, he enjoys eating it, but he just didn't want to eat as much of it. And so he took the popcorn out of his pantry, walked down the hallway to his garage, and put the popcorn on the highest shelf in the garage. Now, if he really wants it, he can just go out there and get it, right? But if he's designing for his lazy decision, for his default action, he's not going to go out and get the popcorn. And that's the core idea here. How can you design your environment so that your lazy choice, the choice you make when you're exhausted, the choice you make when you're just tired and don't want to make a decision, is actually a better choice, that you're presented with a good option by default rather than a bad option. And so there are a variety of ways you can do this. You can do it not just through the examples I've given so far, but also by designing your future actions. So for example, say you want to eat less. Well, you could just buy smaller plates. Research has shown that the average size of a plate has increased by about 22% since the 1970s, and that on average, we fill over 95% of our plate and eat over 95% of what we serve ourselves. So by default, if we make the plate size smaller, we'll serve ourselves less and we'll eat less. And that's a simple way to design your future actions for eating habits. But you can also do this for other habits, like take productivity habits, for example. If you have trouble powering off and going to bed at night, whether that's because you're watching Netflix too late or staying up to work too long, you could use an outlet timer, which you can buy on Amazon for $5 or $10, and then set a time for that outlet to be killed at the end of the night. So at 10 p.m., for example, the power shuts off to that outlet. TV turns off, you go to bed. You can also set up things like, there's one called HomeKit that turns off your lights automatically at a given time throughout at each night. So there are a variety of ways to automate this, but the idea is the same. How do you structure your environment to make the choices automated for yourself or to present yourself with better options rather than trying to fight through your environment to make a positive change? So now I'd like you to click on the worksheet below this video, think about the habit that you want to build, and then write out a few examples of how you could design your environment to promote that habit, right? To make it easier, to put fewer steps between you and the good behavior and more steps between you and the items that distract you from accomplishing that habit. So go ahead and do that now. I'll see you in the next lesson. One of the interesting things about environment design and improving your habits and behavior through shaping your environment is that you don't just have to improve your environment in a positive way, in a way that promotes good behaviors. You can also improve in a way that reduces distractions, interruptions, and bad behaviors. And oftentimes doing that is both a faster way to get to winning and a more effective way to maintain consistency over the long run. Because the things that derail us are the things that upset our frequency and repetition and consistency, not necessarily improving the quality of the work that we do. Both of them are important, of course, but we often forget about how important it is to maintain consistency and avoid distraction. To give you an idea of how important it can be in a real-world context, let's think about Japanese television manufacturers compared to American ones. In the 1970s, Japanese television manufacturers like Sony and Samsung realized that they could compete with the American firms, often not by coming up with a better television, but simply by doing a better job of what they could already do. So for example, Rather than come up with new innovations or game-changing technologies, Japanese firms focused on eliminating waste from all sources of the production line and even reducing the amount of turning that workers needed to do in their workspace so that they could maintain efficiency and build the television sets faster, more effectively, and with fewer errors. And what ended up happening was that over the course of the 1970s, by the time we got to 1979, Japanese television sets were 3 times more popular than the American ones that had been leading just a decade before. Now, what's interesting here is that we're talking about there are 2 different ways to improve. For any task, you have basically a bell curve of your behavior, and the middle of that behavior is your average performance. Now, if you want to improve, you could either boost your best performance, right? Improve your winning, your best days, and that's going to pull your average forward a little bit. Or you could reduce your worst days, right? You could cut down on the days that are pulling you back and dragging you down, and that's another way to shift your average forward. So often we think about our best performance, right? Everybody wants to perform at their best. Everybody wants their best day. Everybody thinks about their top tier performance. People ask what your personal best is if you're in the gym, or what your maximum typing rate is if you're thinking about work, or whatever it may be. We're always focused on the maximum. But instead, by increasing your average performance on the down days, you can also make a shift forward. And this is exactly what the Japanese television manufacturers did. They optimized the environment to reduce the distractions, eliminate the waste, and reduce unnecessary movement, which shifted their average forward mostly by reducing errors rather than capturing wins. And this is often a forgotten way of designing our environment and improving our performance. So, to give you some examples of how you could do this, if you're focused on going to the gym, you could either focus on increasing the intensity of your best workouts. That's the normal approach. Let's get really motivated and work out really hard. Or you could simply focus on missing fewer workouts and doing the same thing. And again, that'll increase the average by increasing your repetitions and consistency. Same way with eating healthier foods. You could focus on trying to stick to a new diet or adhering to a new strict, vegan or paleo or vegetarian or whatever diet plan that you're going to follow. And this is the typical path, right? We're going to focus on how do we perform better with our meals. Or you could simply focus on saying, sometimes I eat healthy meals, but a lot of times I don't, so let me just reduce the amount of unhealthy meals I'm eating. Rather than trying to stick to some new and incredible diet plan, I'll just do what I'm already doing on my good days, but a little more frequently. Similar for saving for retirement or financial habits. You could either try to earn more money, which is often what we're focused on. How do we upgrade? How do we get a promotion? How do we advance our career? Or you could simply focus on losing less money by cutting down on expenses or saving a little bit more. Both of these ways are valid ways of improving, but often we can make addition by subtraction by getting rid of the distractions and the leaky holes in our bucket rather than focusing on pouring more water in. And so that's one of the core lessons of environment design, is that it works not only in a positive way, but also for reducing our negative days. So think about how you can make addition by subtraction by simply eliminating the waste that is preventing you from following through on your habits on a consistent basis. So a few years ago, PetSmart, the popular pet food store, implemented an interesting strategy that showcases a lot about the importance of environment design for habits and behavior change. And what they did was they had a special screen that popped up during the checkout process. So people would walk about the store, get the items that they wanted to buy, and then as they were checking out, they would swipe their credit card, and then they were presented with a prompt that said, "Would you like to donate to help save homeless animals?" And at this point, people could either choose yes and then select the amount that they would like to donate, or they could choose no and continue with the rest of the purchase. And through this one single strategy, without any marketing campaign, without talking to people about it, PetSmart Charities was able to raise over $40 million in a single year. And what is so brilliant about this idea is that, yes, it was a good call to action. Yes, they had pet lovers who were coming into their store and they presented them with something that they were interested in. But what they really did was they stepped into the flow of what somebody was already doing and presented them with a hot trigger at a time when they could act on it and when they were capable of performing that behavior. And so the idea here is, how can you design your environment so that the triggers that you come across will remind you within the flow of your normal day? So let's give you some examples. A few years ago, I wanted to build a flossing habit along with brushing my teeth each day. And so I knew that the flow and the pattern of when I brushed my teeth was I would brush and then I would put the brush back down into its holder. And right next to it, I placed a bowl filled with pre-made flossers that were right there for me to grab up and pick. So in the flow of my normal routine, I was able to just add this new behavior on, and I've been able to stick to it every day since. Another example is say you want to go to the gym. Well, you have a couple different things that you could do here to optimize. The first is you could select a gym that is literally on your path to work or on the path of a normal place that you go to, because then you'll be driving by the gym anyway. It makes sense to leave early or to stop there on your way home because it's already within the flow of your normal behavior pattern. Similarly, if you're trying to get ready to go to the gym and optimize what you want to do, or you'd like to just remind yourself to go to the gym, tonight when you're thinking about, oh, I should go work out tomorrow, set out your gym bag, set out your water bottle, have your clothes ready, and then just set those in front of your bed or in front of the door before you leave so that as you walk out, it's already in the flow of your behavior. You're able to grab it and have another reminder of the habit that you want to perform within the context of your normal day. You're not trying to stretch outside of the bounds of what you already have been doing. So these ideas of designing your behavior and getting into the flow of your normal pattern help you stick with new habits over the long run by capitalizing on the environment that you already operate within and just shaping that slightly to fit with the goals that you have for yourself. So now I'd like you to click on the worksheet below this video and list out at least 10 examples of how you could step into the flow of your normal day and place a reminder or a hot trigger that you can act on at that time to get yourself to fall in line and stick with the habits that you're looking to perform. So go ahead and do that now, and I'll see you in the next video.